That's my feel. It's frightening, you know. I don't know how to explain that. It's so complicated.
But you're talking about human highlight reels, and he's stepping on the mat right now, Frank Chamizo Marquez.
He's strong, about near impossible to take down.
One of the greatest Italian wrestlers, if not the greatest of all time.
And after watching all of his matches, I've discovered something that might surprise you. While Frank's style might appear very instinctual, as he mentions here,
no, he hasn't really thought about it, just ready to wrestle.
No game plan, nothing.
Nothing tactic. No tactic. No tactic.
His style is actually built around a brilliant 3-part system that has made him one of the best.
If not the best defensive wrestler in the world.
So let's dive in. If you've watched any Frank Chamizo match, you've probably seen him do this move.
Knocked off Chamizo last year at these European Championships.
The Uchimata, or inner thigh throw, is Frank's workhorse. He uses the Uchimata for everything from clearing the underhook to dealing with the single leg and the double.
There's a double leg!
And this video wouldn't be any good if I didn't talk about Frank's overhook, which is one of his most common positions. And he plays it a few different ways. The standard way is staying heavy on top of his opponent's underhook, but he also does something really interesting here.
Move your feet! Get your head where you want it!
He frames off of his opponent's hip with his overhook arm when they begin to drive into him. This makes it very difficult to make use of their underhook and will usually make them switch to something else. But that's not all. Take a look at these matches and see if you can spot what he does.
Team Russia in the medal charge. Chamizo, as we saw straight away, the electric eel movement there just slipped away.
Frank makes use of a 2-on-1 wrist grab from the overhook, grabbing his opponent's far arm in a way that I've never seen used by anyone else. This makes it almost impossible for his opponents to advance with their underhook, canceling most of their offense. But the overhook alone can't deal with every situation, as it does leave him vulnerable to attacks like the single leg and the double leg. But Frank is more than prepared for this, using his Uchimata system to deal with almost every possible situation. If his opponent goes for a single leg, Frank will kick his lead leg between his opponent's legs, all while maintaining his overhook grip and throwing his opponent like this. But what makes Frank really hard to deal with is his ability to adapt, and even if that arm is not in reach, he can still go for his Uchimata.
Driving hard on that shoulder lock, now a shoulder throw attempt.
Once he hits his throw, there are 4 different outcomes. 1, he gets the throw. 2, he gets his hips lower than his opponent's hips and can continue to elevate them. 3, his opponent tries to get their hips lower than his hips, leaving them open to Frank cartwheeling over their underhook. And 4, his opponent decides to let go of the single leg entirely. This same system works for the double leg.
Chamizo going away with it. Gets the legs though.
99% of people who James Green takes that double on, he's scoring.
As grabbing for both of Frank's legs gives him access to both of his opponent's arms, which only strengthens his throwing ability. One big question that I had while researching Frank was what happens when he can't get his overhook grip? Well, Frank has an answer for that too.
Let's see if he can score.
When the overhook isn't available, Frank's secondary option is to go for a front headlock while controlling his opponent's free arm. He doesn't attack from this position, but instead uses it to work his way to eventually freeing his trapped leg. But at the highest level of wrestling, his opponents are masters of chaining their attacks together. For instance, running the pipe from the single leg or shooting a low single leg are 2 of the most common attacks we see used against Frank. In those cases, Frank won't be able to establish his overhook or front headlock in time, so instead, he has a whole game designed for shutting down the single leg. This involves framing off of his opponent's head and trying to kick his trapped leg out, often turning his whole body away and placing both of his hands to the mat. If he can manage to free his leg, awesome, but often we'll see that he'll try to square himself back up with his opponent, where he can look to enter into his Uchimata system or free his leg. If his opponent is too high up on his leg, instead of trying to kick out, Frank will sit on their head or shoulder.
This is interesting here.
And then use that to look for his overhook or the front headlock. And if his opponent doesn't chase him, he can do this.
Burrows into the leg, now Single has it up in the air, Chamizo. Oh my goodness. Fantastic defense, and he's gonna wrestle through it.
Yeah, good luck keeping that single leg. The second system that Frank relies on is triggered by his opponent's use of the Russian tie, where they use both of their hands to control one of his arms. Frank's initial defense involves framing off of his opponent's head and using that to free his trapped arm, often while moving towards the trapped arm side. But when that doesn't work, Frank enters into his Ko-uchi-gari system, or the small inner reap, using a push-pull movement. Similar to earlier, instead of freeing his trapped arm, Frank will switch his arms so that the trapped arm will frame off of his opponent's head, while taking a cross step with the same side leg and free arm to their knee. This can be kind of confusing, so let's watch that again.
As you go back to some of the highlights, early on, this was right out of the gate. Chamizo close to getting the two. He ends up with the foot out of bounds and the 1 point on the step out.
In the ideal world, this will often catch his opponent off guard for a takedown, but often, Frank is able to transition to a single leg or double leg off of the Ko-uchi-gari system. For a highlight reel finish, which leads us into part 3, the step behind system, that he uses whenever his opponent is able to make their way past his other two defenses and get behind him. If you guys have watched my video on Eduardo Tellez, it's eerily similar to the turtle half guard, and it actually involves a similar step. We see that Frank will trap his opponent's leg between his legs, and then he can reach between his own legs to grab their leg for a re-attack. This one might take a considerable amount of flexibility. In this case, his opponent had the far side underhook, but there's actually an easier version when the opponent has the near side underhook, which we see in this match. Frank uses his step behind system to escape from everything from the front headlock to the throw by.
And very pretty attack.
Speaking of doubles.
And just goes to show how versatile he is. I mean, he has a defense for every single attack. Which left me guessing as to how does he get all of his systems to work. From watching all of his videos, I've pinpointed a few key factors that I believe set him apart from everyone else. Frank relies heavily on his footwork and wide stance, or the Cuban stance as he calls it, and lateral movement that make a lot of his defense possible.
So I got right back to work. How about that mindset?
That's what makes him so special.
Couple this with his heavy hips, which are a nightmare to deal with, and Frank has the perfect balance
With his hips, his hands, his head, his crazy high flying attacks.
all moving together, allowing him to turn his noteworthy defense into his attack.
Chamizo's gonna wrestle through the position. Now Chamizo looking for a 1 point reversal. He's gonna score.
While Frank is known as a defensive wrestler, and possibly the best defensive wrestler ever, when he switches gears, he's unlike any other athlete.
Chamizo Marquez looked to be on top, almost caught there by Zamolov, but now he's got the leg.
In fact, Frank's wrestling IQ is off the charts. And if he does end up in a position outside of his three systems of defense, his most powerful ability is his capacity to scramble. This is the combination of starting wrestling at the young age of 7 in a competitive environment like Cuba, and years of experience wrestling internationally. However, Frank's style isn't without its drawbacks. He has a tendency to focus too much on defense and not on offense, which Frank himself acknowledges.
I need more attack in my matches.
And while he has made great strides in advancing his game, I think the biggest drawback is that his style simply uses too much energy.
So Kazanov digging hard. Chamizo, look at him circle his way back out of trouble, and now he will go out.
And that limits his ability to go on offense. Taking into account all of his movements and being able to defend all of his opponent's techniques can take a heavy toll on his energy reserves.
Chamizo just changed his pace a little bit. He went from exhibition to, okay.
Especially when going up against the best wrestlers in the world. So I can see how it can be hard for him to change things up when he always needs to be at his best, and his style has gotten him this far. All things considered, Frank Chamizo is one of the best wrestlers in the world, and I believe that there's a lot that we can take from him as jiu-jitsu athletes, as his style is all about keeping yourself safe and escaping bad positions. Versus how many jiu-jitsu athletes learn wrestling today.
You circle, you don't just get backed up into the, into the cage.
Which is highly offense-based, but that also tends to put us in bad positions.
Oh, and he throws up a guillotine right away! Run on, Varenga has us tight!
So if you would like to learn more about how to use wrestling in BJJ, be sure to check out this video right over here.
A little bit. Man, I'm telling you before, Shane and Frankie's focus, his training, the same Frankie, but now it's another history.